Imagine that's your job. You've got to stand in a pit of mud and do this all day. Have you ever taken a run on the beach? Your feet get torn up. You're going to have camel's feet by the time it's over. And then you go home exhausted. Who's making your dinner and cleaning your house while you're gone? Slaving for somebody else. Their lives were miserable. They're the ones that built cities and pyramids, all under slave labor. And so God comes to Moses, the whole burning bush thing, tells Moses, we're getting them out of there. I want you to go to Pharaoh and tell him you're getting 3 days off to worship me in the desert. He's not going to let you go, but this is what I want you to tell him. And when he doesn't let you go, I'm going to take some action. You just wait and see. And if he doesn't believe you, you can do this trick, and this trick. So anyway, Moses goes to the Pharaoh and says, let him go. God said. And Moses says, no. In fact, I guess because you're here, Pharaoh says, no. I guess because you're here, you must be idle. You've got a lot of time on your hands to come complain. So here's what's going to happen now. You're going to continue to be responsible for the same amount of work, but we're not going to provide the supplies anymore. You got to get your own straw. Where are you going to get that? And so now they can't produce the amount of work they were producing before because Pharaoh was producing the straw. So they start getting beaten for not doing the same amount of work that they can't possibly do. He was just nasty. They were mean, evil to them. Well, William Wilberforce freed the modern slaves. Their lives were no better. And Moses freed the ancient slaves. The Lord said to Moses, I have indeed seen the misery of my people in Egypt. I have heard them crying out because of their slave drivers, and I'm concerned about their suffering. So I have come down to rescue them from the hand of the Egyptians, and to bring them up out of that land into a good, spacious land, a land flowing with milk and honey. And now the cry of the Israelites has reached me, and I've seen the way the Egyptians are oppressing them. So now go. I'm sending you to Pharaoh to bring my people, the Israelites, out of Egypt. William Wilberforce used politics. He got people behind him, got a lot of signatures, started showing people what slavery was like, had people visiting slave ships. God used Wilberforce and politics to free modern slaves. Tried that with Pharaoh. He sent Moses, who was raised in Pharaoh's household, with some nice words, let my people go. And Pharaoh said no. And Moses says, you don't understand. This is not an option. You must let my people go. I've never heard of your God. I'm not letting your people go. Well, let me introduce him to you. Pharaoh goes out to the Nile River to do his typical Nile River thing. You know, they worship the Nile River. They had a god of the Nile River. So Moses lifts up his staff. Next thing you know, the entire river is blood. The Nile is a huge river. Those of us who live in the desert, we don't even know what a river is. Some rivers are huge. If you try to swim across it, you drown just for the length. You know what I'm saying? So the whole thing's turned into blood. Now you're Pharaoh, you're standing there. Dang. I'm convinced you can go. That's it. That's all I take for me, you know. And it wasn't just the Nile River that was turned to blood. It says in the Bible that every standing pot was filled with blood throughout all of Egypt. So if you had a pitcher of water on the table at home and you poured yourself a glass, it was blood too. Yeah, it was a massive, massive miracle. And it also showed who's in charge of the Nile River. It wasn't their little god. He couldn't do anything about the water. And God kept heaping up the plagues. So instead of politics, Moses used plagues. Now, I don't know what it's like to go through a plague. I've never been through one. You know, in modern Israel, and I say modern, I'm talking like the 1800s, there's this huge swarm of locusts that blacked out the sky, and it turned day into night, they said. And it was just, all our crops are destroyed, we're undone. The next thing you know it, a bunch of storks show up. Now, you don't see storks there. Every once in a while, one might be flying through. But it was so many storks that when you looked at the ground, all you could see was white, as far as the eye could see. And they ate up all the locusts. These things happen. But the plagues that God poured upon the Egyptians, there were no storks. There were just all sorts of plagues. Now, I don't like the idea of opening my cupboards and there being frogs in there. That plague I might not like, but I'm just glad they aren't spiders. You know what I'm saying? I could deal with the frogs. But then there was this plague of swarms. And it doesn't tell us what kind of swarms they were, but if you look at the Hebrew word, one of the swarms indicates that these things might have bit. So imagine you're living in Egypt, the Nile River turns to blood. Before it's all cleaned up, a bunch of frogs come out, so many that you can't even walk without stepping on them. You following me? You open your cupboards, they're in your cupboards, they're in your bed, they're in your pillow, they're in your bathtub. Frogs! And then these swarms come, and they start biting you. How bad is that? Well, I showed you a clip on the slavery. Let me show you a clip on the plagues as well, just to help you understand what these people experienced. Voluntarily, mind you, because all they had to do was let them go. God said, Israel is my firstborn son. Let them go and worship me, or I will slay your firstborn son. At the start of the story, the Egyptians were already tossing Jewish babies into the Nile River to keep them from multiplying so much. God said, paybacks, they're coming. And he gave them 9 plague warnings before the angel of death came and slew the firstborn. To understand how powerful the firstborn plague impacted the lives of the Egyptians, if you are or have a firstborn in your house right now, please raise your hand high. Look around, everybody. Raise it up. By the way, this is people, firstborn people. Now, keep your hand up if you've got a firstborn pet. Put your hand up. Because God killed pets too. He got all of them. It said there was a cry that was heard throughout the land of Egypt that night. Could you imagine every household probably had at least 2 dead humans in it, plus dead pets. Finally, the people said, Pharaoh, enough already. Let them go. And Pharaoh lost his son too. So I'm sure he was happy to let them go. Well, slavery is an ugly thing. But there's 2 kinds of slavery talked about in the Bible. There's the physical, literal kind that we have just been looking at. And there's also, and I don't even know what to call it. You call it a moral kind, a spiritual kind. It's slavery of a non-literal sort. It's bondage to something else in your life. 2 Peter says, we are in bondage to whatever controls us. Maybe a destructive habit. So you've got slavery that's forced on you, and then you got the kind of slavery that maybe it's not forced on you. Maybe when you were a kid you decided you would try smoking marijuana a couple times. And you know what? This ain't so bad. And now you're 30-something years old and addicted to crack, and you're saying, man, why did I ever take that first joint? I'm stuck with it now. It's another kind of bondage. The Bible says humans, that's you and I, are sold as slaves to sin. Sin is a vicious and cruel master. Now, what hope does a slave have? You live in Egypt, your entire race of people are enslaved, you've been doing this drudgery day after day ever since you could walk. You've got no hope. You've got no future. You've got no expectations other than 30, 40 more years of this until you die of overwork. What a miserable existence. The only hope a slave would have is if somebody would take pity on him and set him free. Hey, you know that doesn't happen. During the days of Jesus, so we go forward now, slavery was still common. The Romans ran the world. And if a slave was freed, they were pretty much treated like an average citizen. Maybe they couldn't run for high office or something like that, but they could pretty much do whatever any other citizen did. And when a slave was freed, that classification of people was given its own name. So if you were set free, you became a freedman.